The contract was supposed to be simple. Marry Brianna Porter, secure the inheritance, divorce within a year, and walk away with enough money to save his family's shipping empire from bankruptcy. Blake Harrison signed his name on the marriage certificate with steady hands, his jaw tight as he glanced at the woman beside him at City Hall. She wore a cream dress that fell just below her knees, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, brown eyes staring straight ahead at the clerk processing their paperwork. No flowers, no guests, no pretense of romance. Just two strangers bound by a legal document and desperation. 3 months earlier, Blake had sat in his late uncle's lawyer's office, listening to the most absurd will he had ever heard. Theodore Harrison had been eccentric, wealthy beyond measure from decades in the maritime shipping industry, and apparently determined to control his nephew's life from beyond the grave. The terms were clear. Blake would inherit the $20 million needed to save Harrison Maritime only if he married within 6 months and remained married for at least 1 year. Theodore had watched his nephew work himself into the ground building the company, never taking time for a personal life, and decided to force the issue. Blake had raged against it, hired 3 different lawyers to contest it, and ultimately realized he had no choice. The company employed over 200 people. Families depended on those jobs. His own parents had poured their savings into keeping the business afloat during the shipping industry's recent downturn. He needed that inheritance. Finding a wife had proven harder than negotiating shipping contracts with foreign companies. He could not marry someone who might expect a real relationship, who would be hurt when the arrangement ended. He needed someone equally desperate, equally pragmatic. He found Brianna through a private investigator, though that made him sound more calculated than he felt. The investigator had mentioned her situation almost in passing. A 26-year-old woman about to lose her grandmother's art gallery to creditors, drowning in medical debt from her grandmother's final year of cancer treatment. The gallery had been in her family for 3 generations, filled with local artists' work, a community hub in a gentrifying neighborhood fighting to maintain its character. Brianna had emptied her savings, maxed out credit cards, and still faced foreclosure in 2 months. Their first meeting happened at a coffee shop near the gallery. Blake had rehearsed his pitch carefully, but seeing her in person made the words stick in his throat. She had paint under her fingernails, exhaustion carved into the delicate bones of her face, but when she looked at him, her gaze was direct and unflinching. "You want to marry me for money," she said flatly after he explained. "And you are offering me enough to save the gallery in exchange." $200,000, Blake confirmed. "Paid directly to your creditors upon marriage, another $100,000 when we divorce after a year. You keep the gallery, I get my inheritance, we both walk away." "Why me?" "Because you need money and have no illusions about romance. Because you are not looking for love, just survival, same as me." She had studied him for a long moment, her coffee growing cold between her hands. "I want it in writing, a prenup that protects both of us, clear terms, no expectations beyond what's on paper." "Agreed." They shook hands like business partners closing a deal. Now, 6 weeks later, they were married. The clerk congratulated them with practiced cheer, and Blake found himself staring at the gold band on his left hand, feeling its unfamiliar weight. Brianna touched her own ring absently, twisting it around her finger. "I guess we should discuss living arrangements," she said as they walked out into the bright October afternoon. Leaves scattered across the courthouse steps, carried by a wind that smelled of coming winter. "The prenup states we need to maintain a shared residence," Blake said. "For appearance's sake, my uncle's lawyer will be checking. Your place or mine?" Blake thought of his sterile downtown loft, all glass and steel and emptiness. "Yours, if that works. The gallery's attached, right?" "It will be easier for you to work." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, but she nodded. "Okay, I will clear space for your things." They drove separately to her building, a renovated warehouse in the arts district with exposed brick and large windows. The gallery occupied the ground floor, currently closed for renovations she could finally afford. Her apartment above it was small but filled with light, walls covered in paintings, shelves overflowing with books and art supplies. It looked lived in, loved, completely opposite to his minimalist aesthetic. "The spare room is here," she said, opening a door to reveal a modest bedroom currently serving as storage. "I will move these canvases out. I can help, I've got it." Her walls were already up, her tone professional and distant. Blake told himself that was good, that was what they both wanted. He spent the afternoon moving boxes while she carefully transported paintings to the gallery space below. They worked in near silence, the only sounds the shuffle of footsteps and the distant honk of traffic outside. That night, they ate takeout at opposite ends of her small dining table. Brianna pushed pad thai around her plate, not really eating. "We should establish some ground rules," she said finally. "Beyond what's in the contract." "Like what?" "Boundaries, privacy. You do not go through my things, I do not go through yours. We maintain separate lives as much as possible. This is just a living arrangement, fine with me. And if either of us wants to date someone." She paused, frowning. "Actually, we probably should not. It could complicate things legally." "I am not planning on it," Blake said. "This year is about saving my company, nothing else." "Right, the company." She finally met his eyes. "What kind of business are you in, anyway? You never actually said." "Maritime shipping. My family's company, Harrison Maritime. We handle freight transport along the eastern seaboard, some international routes. It was doing well until the tariff situations and fuel cost increases hit. We overextended trying to upgrade our fleet, and then contracts started falling through. My uncle's inheritance is the only thing that can pull us out. That sounds incredibly stressful." "It is." He found himself talking more than he intended, explaining the late nights, the constant negotiations, the weight of knowing so many people depended on his decisions. Brianna listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "The gallery is not that different," she said when he finished. "Smaller scale, obviously, but it is the same pressure. My grandmother built something meaningful, and I cannot let it die because I could not save her and keep the business afloat at the same time." They looked at each other across the table, and Blake felt an unexpected flicker of understanding pass between them. They were both drowning in responsibility, both willing to enter a loveless marriage to save what mattered most. The first weeks of marriage were awkward and stilted. They moved around each other like careful strangers, overly polite and distant. Blake left for work before dawn, often returning after dark. Brianna spent long hours in the gallery preparing for a reopening show. They communicated through notes left on the kitchen counter, brief text messages about schedules and groceries. Blake told himself it was ideal, exactly what he wanted. He could focus on work without distraction. He successfully renegotiated 2 major contracts, secured new financing terms, began the slow process of stabilizing Harrison Maritime. His parents asked about his sudden marriage, confused and concerned. He deflected with vague explanations about meeting someone special, hating the lie but unable to share the truth. But sometimes, late at night when he returned home exhausted, he would find Brianna still awake, painting in the living room with music playing softly. She worked with complete absorption, brush moving across canvas with confident strokes. He would watch from the doorway for a moment before retreating to his room, struck by how alive she looked when she created, how different from the guarded woman who barely spoke to him. One evening in November, Blake came home to find the apartment filled with the smell of cooking. Brianna stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot, her hair escaping from a messy ponytail. "I made soup," she said when she noticed him. "Butternut squash, there is plenty if you want some." He was supposed to say no, maintain the distance between them. Instead, he found himself setting down his briefcase. "That would be great, actually. Thanks." They ate together, and for the first time the silence felt less hostile and more comfortable. Brianna asked about his day, and he found himself telling her about a difficult client, the frustration of dealing with someone who refused to see reason. "Some people just want to fight," she said. "I had an artist once who complained about everything: wall placement, lighting, price points. Nothing was ever right. Finally, I realized he was not actually upset about the gallery. He was going through a divorce and taking it out on everyone around him. What did you do?" Sat him down, told him I understood he was hurting, but I could not fix his marriage, only display his art. Asked if he wanted to continue working together under those terms. He broke down crying, apologized, and we actually became friends. His work sold really well. "You are good with people," she shrugged. "I like people. Their stories, what drives them to create, why art matters to them. That is the best part of running the gallery, honestly. The community aspect." Blake thought about his own work, the endless spreadsheets and logistics and negotiations. When had he last enjoyed any of it? When had it become purely about survival rather than the satisfaction of building something? "Do you like what you do?" Brianna asked, as if reading his thoughts. "I used to. My father started Harrison Maritime 30 years ago with 2 ships. Watching it grow, being part of that, it meant something. But lately, it just feels like I am constantly trying to prevent disaster." "Maybe once things stabilize, you will remember why you loved it. Maybe." After that night, something shifted between them. They started eating dinner together regularly, sharing details about their days. Brianna invited Blake to the gallery's reopening, and he found himself genuinely interested in the artwork she had curated, the way she talked about each artist with such passion and knowledge. He watched her work the room, greeting guests with warm smiles, making connections between collectors and creators. She wore a deep blue dress that made her eyes look almost black, and more than once Blake caught himself staring at her profile, the graceful line of her neck, the animated way she gestured when excited. He quickly looked away, reminding himself this was temporary, just business. But his body was not listening to logic. He became hyper-aware of her presence in the apartment, the sound of her humming while she painted, the way she left coffee mugs everywhere, her habit of walking around barefoot. Sometimes she would emerge from her studio covered in paint, exhausted and exhilarated, and Blake wanted to ask what she was working on, wanted to understand what put that light in her eyes. Winter arrived with brutal cold, and the apartment's heating proved inadequate. Blake woke one night to find Brianna standing in the living room wrapped in blankets, frowning at the radiator. "It is not working properly," she said. "I called the landlord, but he will not come until morning." Blake examined the ancient radiator, trying a few adjustments without success. "We could use space heaters." "I only have one, and it barely helps." They ended up both in the living room, sharing blankets on the couch while the single space heater struggled against the cold. It was too uncomfortable to sleep, so they talked instead, voices quiet in the dark apartment. Brianna told him about her grandmother, how she had immigrated from Italy with nothing and built the gallery through sheer determination and love of art. How she had raised Brianna after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8, filling their small apartment with color and creativity and unconditional love. "She used to say art was how we make sense of the world," Brianna said softly. "How we communicate what words cannot express." Even when she was dying, she wanted to talk about paintings, about beauty. "She made me promise to keep the gallery alive." Blake found himself sharing things he had never told anyone. How his uncle Theodore had been more of a father figure than his own distant dad, teaching him about ships and the sea, about honor and responsibility. How the weight of saving the company sometimes felt crushing, like he was carrying everyone's hopes on his shoulders and one wrong step would destroy everything. "You are doing your best," Brianna said. "That is all anyone can do. Is it enough, though? It has to be." Their faces were close in the darkness, and Blake was suddenly aware of her warmth beside him, the way her breath misted in the cold air, how her eyes reflected the city lights filtering through the windows. He could kiss her so easily, just lean forward a few inches. The thought sent adrenaline through his system, his heart rate kicking up. Brianna looked away first, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. We should try to sleep, work in the morning, right? Yeah. But Blake lay awake long after her breathing evened out beside him, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince himself that the tightness in his chest was just from the cold. The holidays approached, and both of them faced questions from their families about meeting the mysterious spouse. Blake's parents insisted on a dinner, and he warned Brianna it would be awkward. We just need to act like a couple, she said pragmatically. Hold hands, agree with each other, standard stuff. You make it sound simple. It is just acting. But when they arrived at his childhood home in the suburbs, Blake found himself genuinely nervous. His mother opened the door with a huge smile, immediately pulling Brianna into a hug. Finally, we meet the woman who captured our son's heart. Blake never tells us anything. We were starting to think he made you up. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Harrison, Brianna said warmly. Thank you for having me. Blake's father was more reserved, studying Brianna with the same analytical gaze Blake recognized from his own mirror. Dinner was a minefield of questions about how they met, their relationship, their plans. Blake and Brianna had rehearsed a story about meeting at a charity auction, but his mother kept digging for romantic details. Was it love at first sight? She asked, eyes bright with curiosity. Blake opened his mouth, not sure what to say, but Brianna beat him to it. Not exactly, she said, glancing at Blake with a small smile. I thought he was too serious. All business, no warmth, but he kept surprising me. Showing up when I needed help, listening when I talked, being so much kinder than his gruff exterior suggested. He grew on me. Blake stared at her, unsure how much was performance and how much was truth. His mother looked delighted. And you, Blake, when did you know she was the one? He looked at Brianna, really looked at her, taking in the way she sat with relaxed confidence in his parents' home, how she had charmed his mother while earning his father's respect through intelligent questions about the shipping industry. When had she become so essential to his daily life? When had coming home started meaning seeing her rather than just reaching his residence? She made me remember there is more to life than work, he said quietly. She reminded me why any of it matters. Something flickered in Brianna's eyes, and her smile turned genuine, soft and surprised. Under the table, she reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. Blake squeezed back, and it did not feel like acting anymore. The drive home was quiet. When they reached the apartment, Brianna paused before going to her room. Your parents are nice, she said. Your mom really loves you. She liked you too, a lot. I might have oversold our relationship story a bit. Sorry if I made things awkward. You did not. It was good, convincing. He hesitated. Was any of it true about me growing on you? Brianna met his eyes, and the air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Some of it. You are not as terrible to live with as I expected. High praise. She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Good night, Blake. Good night. But neither of them moved, standing in the hallway like teenagers afraid to break a spell. Finally, Brianna turned away, and Blake went to his room with his heart pounding for reasons he did not want to examine. After that night, the boundaries they had carefully constructed began to crumble. They found excuses to spend time together, watching movies on the couch, cooking elaborate meals, talking until late into the night. Blake started leaving work earlier, drawn home by the knowledge that Brianna would be there, that she would ask about his day like she genuinely cared. Because maybe she did care, the same way he caught himself thinking about her during meetings, wondering if she had eaten lunch, whether her current painting was going well. One snowy evening in January, Blake returned home to find Brianna standing in front of a huge canvas, tears streaming down her face. The painting showed an elderly woman in a gallery surrounded by colorful artwork, her face rendered with such love and detail that Blake immediately knew it was her grandmother. Hey, he said softly, crossing to her side. It is beautiful. I cannot get her hands right, Brianna said, voice breaking. She had such expressive hands, always gesturing when she talked, and I cannot capture it. It has been a year since she died, and I am forgetting. I am forgetting how she moved, how she laughed, and I cannot stand it." Blake did not think, just pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing, and he held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances he did not know if she could hear. They stood like that for a long time, her grief pouring out while he simply held her, offering the only comfort he could through his presence. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and tear-stained, and Blake thought she had never looked more real, more human. "Sorry," she whispered. "I got your shirt wet." "I do not care. Come on, sit down." He guided her to the couch, then made her tea despite having no idea if he was doing it right. She accepted the mug with shaking hands, and Blake sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. "Tell me about her," he said. "Your grandmother. What was she like?" So Brianna talked, and Blake listened to stories about a fierce, loving woman who believed art could change the world. How she had smuggled paintings out of Italy during World War II, how she had fought against discrimination and poverty to build her gallery, how she had filled Brianna's childhood with magic and possibility. "She would have liked you," Brianna said eventually. "She always said I needed someone who understood responsibility, who would not expect me to give up the gallery for a relationship." "I would never ask you to give up something you love," Blake said. "The gallery is part of who you are." Brianna looked at him, and the moment stretched between them, loaded with meaning. Blake was suddenly, painfully aware that he was in love with his wife. Not the business arrangement wife, not the stranger he had married for convenience, but this woman. Brianna, who painted her grief into beauty, who ran her gallery with passion and intelligence, who had somehow become the best part of his day without him noticing the transition from obligation to genuine affection, to whatever this crushing feeling in his chest was. He should say something, but what? Their contract had 4 months left. They were supposed to divorce, take their money, return to separate lives. Confessing feelings would ruin everything, make the inevitable end painful and complicated. So he said nothing, just sat beside her while she finished her tea, their silence no longer awkward but intimate, comfortable in a way that terrified him. The next morning, Blake woke to find Brianna already in her studio, working on the painting of her grandmother. She had fixed the hands somehow, captured that expressive quality she had been struggling for. When she saw him watching, she smiled, and it hit him like a physical blow, the simple joy on her face. He was so screwed. They fell into a new pattern after that night, one that felt dangerously close to a real relationship. They cooked together, arguing playfully about whether garlic was necessary in every dish. They started a tradition of Saturday morning farmers' market trips, bundled against the cold while they browsed produce and baked goods. Blake bought her flowers without thinking about it, just because the roses reminded him of a painting in her gallery. Brianna started wearing his sweaters around the apartment, swimming in the oversized fabric, and Blake found it unbearably endearing. His colleagues noticed the change in him, how he smiled more, left meetings early to make it home for dinner. His parents called regularly, delighted that marriage seemed to make their son so happy. And he was happy, Blake realized. For the first time in years, he woke up excited rather than dreading the day ahead. But the knowledge of their contract's end date loomed like a storm on the horizon. 4 months became 3, then 2. They never talked about it, both carefully avoiding any mention of their arrangement or its expiration. Blake told himself he would bring it up, have an honest conversation about whether they could try making this real. Tomorrow, he always promised himself. He would do it tomorrow. In March, Harrison Maritime officially emerged from its financial crisis. Blake signed the final contracts that secured the company's future, then sat in his office staring at the documents. He had done it. Saved the business, protected the employees, honored his uncle's legacy. He should feel triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow, because the company was secure, which meant the marriage had served its purpose. Their contract ended in 2 months. Soon, Brianna would have no reason to stay with him, and he had no idea how to ask her to. He drove home slowly, dreading and longing for her presence in equal measure. The apartment was dark when he arrived, but he heard music coming from the gallery below. He found Brianna hanging artwork for a new show, balanced on a ladder while she adjusted a frame. "Let me help," he said, and she startled, nearly dropping the painting. "Blake, I did not hear you come in. How was work?" "Good, great actually, we finalized everything." "The company is going to be fine." "That is amazing, we should celebrate." She climbed down from the ladder, grinning. "I will make that pasta you love, open the good wine." "Brianna." He caught her hand, pulling her to a stop. "We need to talk." Her smile faded and fear flickered across her face. "Okay, about what?" Blake opened his mouth, all his rehearsed speeches evaporating. How did he tell her that somewhere between the business arrangement and now he had fallen completely in love with her? That the thought of divorce made him physically ill? That he wanted to renegotiate their contract into a real marriage, a real life together, before he could find the words, Brianna spoke. "It is about the divorce, right? The contract ends soon. We should probably discuss logistics, how to handle the separation." "Is that what you want?" The question came out harsher than he intended. "To separate?" She looked away, pulling her hand from his. "That was always the plan. We both got what we needed. You saved your company, I saved the gallery. Mission accomplished. And if I want to renegotiate the terms, what do you mean?" Blake stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I mean, I do not want a divorce. I want to stay married, to you, for real this time." Brianna's eyes went wide, her breath catching. "Blake." "I am in love with you," he said, the words rushing out now that he had started. "I have been for months. Coming home to you, cooking together, talking until 3 in the morning about everything and nothing. You have become my best friend, my partner, the person I want to share good news with. The thought of losing you is killing me, Brianna. So I am asking, can we try making this real? No contract, no obligations, just us choosing each other." Tears spilled down her cheeks and Blake's stomach dropped. He had miscalculated, pushed too hard, ruined everything. "You absolute idiot," Brianna said, but she was smiling, laughing through her tears. "I have been in love with you since January, probably earlier. I kept telling myself it was just the proximity, just convenience, but it was not. You made me feel safe. You held me when I cried and bought me flowers and asked about my art like it mattered. You made me laugh again, made me remember that life could be more than just survival. I did not want to say anything because I thought you still saw this as business, that I was reading too much into shared dinners and the way you looked at me sometimes." Blake kissed her before she could say more, pouring months of restrained longing into the contact. Brianna made a soft sound of surprise, then melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck. They kissed like drowning people finding air, desperate and relieved and full of barely contained emotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "So that is a yes to staying married." "That is a yes to staying married," she confirmed, laughing. "But we are doing this right. Real vows, not a courthouse transaction. A wedding where we actually mean what we say. Whatever you want. I will marry you 100 times if that is what it takes. Just once more should do it." They renewed their vows 2 months later in a small ceremony at the gallery, surrounded by friends and family and art. Brianna wore a vintage lace dress and carried wildflowers, and Blake barely heard the officiant's words because he was too busy memorizing every detail of her face, the joy radiating from her smile. When the officiant instructed him to kiss his bride, Blake did so with his whole heart, claiming her mouth with a tenderness that drew cheers from their guests. Brianna kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, and Blake thought about how this woman had saved him in ways that had nothing to do with money or contracts. She had reminded him how to live rather than just survive, how to open his heart to possibility. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "My wife." "I love you too," she whispered back. "My husband, for real this time." The reception lasted until late, filled with toasts and dancing and celebration. Blake's parents pulled him aside at one point, his mother dabbing at her eyes. "We knew something was off about your first wedding," she said. "Too rushed, too impersonal, but we can see how much you love each other now. Whatever changed between then and now, I am grateful for it." "She changed everything," Blake said simply, watching Brianna across the room as she laughed with her artist friends. "She made me want to be better, do better, not for the company or anyone else, just for her, because she deserves everything." His father clapped him on the shoulder. "That is what love should be, son, partnership, choosing each other every day." Blake returned to Brianna's side, pulling her into his arms as slow music played. They swayed together, lost in their own world. "What are you thinking about?" Brianna asked, her head resting against his chest. "About how I married you for inheritance and ended up with so much more. You were supposed to be a business arrangement. Instead, you became my whole world. We both got pretty lucky, I think. Entering a marriage of convenience that turned into the real thing. Not many people get that story. Most people do not start with a contract and end with forever." "Forever," Brianna echoed, tilting her face up to his. "I like the sound of that." Blake kissed her again, soft and slow, a promise of all the tomorrows they would spend together. Around them, their guests celebrated, but he was only aware of the woman in his arms, the weight of her wedding ring matching his own, the future spreading before them full of possibility. 2 years later, they stood in the same gallery, but this time Brianna was hugely pregnant, one hand resting on her swollen belly as she directed the hanging of a new show. Blake hovered nearby, ready to help even though she insisted she was fine. "You are being overprotective again," she said, but her smile took the sting from the words. "You are 8 months pregnant and climbing on things. I am allowed to worry. The baby is fine, we are fine, and this show needs to open on time." Blake wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers on her stomach. Their daughter kicked forcefully, and he felt the movement against his palms, still amazed that they had created this life together. "She's going to be stubborn like her mother," he said. "And bossy like her father," Brianna countered. "Poor kid does not stand a chance." They had debated having children seriously for months, both aware of how much a baby would change their lives. But watching Brianna light up every time she saw kids in the gallery, noticing how gently Blake interacted with his young nieces, they both realized they wanted this. Wanted to build a family together, create the loving home neither of them had thought possible during their contract marriage. The gallery had thrived over the past 2 years, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Brianna had expanded it, adding studio space where she taught art classes to local children. She still painted, her work gaining recognition in wider artistic circles, but her real passion remained nurturing other artists, giving them the opportunities her grandmother had given her. Harrison Maritime was equally successful, and Blake had found joy in his work again now that he was not drowning in stress. He had learned to delegate, to trust his employees, to leave work at reasonable hours so he could spend evenings with his wife. The company mattered, but it was no longer his entire identity. "I have been thinking," Brianna said, leaning back against him. "We should probably tell our daughter the truth about how we got married someday when she is old enough. That we entered a business arrangement and fell in love. That sometimes the best things come from unexpected places, that love can grow even when you are not looking for it, that her parents were smart enough to recognize something real when it happened." Blake turned her in his arms, kissing her deeply. "I think that is a perfect story. True love disguised as convenience. The CEO who married for inheritance and found everything he actually needed," Brianna teased. "The artist who saved her gallery and gained a family," Blake countered. Their daughter kicked again, as if agreeing, and they both laughed. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or joys the future held, they would face it together. Not because a contract bound them, but because they chose each other every single day. That choice, made freely and with full hearts, meant everything. Blake had signed that marriage certificate expecting a business transaction. He had gained a wife, a partner, a love that transformed his entire world. Looking at Brianna now, glowing with pregnancy and happiness, he could not imagine how empty his life had been before her. The inheritance had saved his company, but she had saved him in every way that mattered. "I love you," he said, the words as essential as breathing. "Thank you for taking a chance on a grumpy CEO with a ridiculous contract." "Thank you for being someone worth falling in love with," Brianna replied, her eyes shining. "Best business decision I ever made." They stood together in the gallery, surrounded by art and light and possibility, their daughter moving between them, the life they had built more beautiful than any painting. What had started as convenience had become the truest love either of them had known, proving that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. Sometimes you just had to be brave enough to let convenience turn into something real, something lasting, something worth keeping forever.